Hello, friends. I'm Harry. Here, we unearth lost letters, raw echoes of love, pain, and secrets buried by time. Join me as we travel through time and feel the love, regret, and hope inked on these forgotten pages. Lost letter. I cannot call you traitor, though others do. This letter was discovered in 1934 during renovation of a manor house in Westchester County, New York. Found hidden inside a secret compartment of an 18th century secretary desk, the letter was written on handmade paper with walnut ink that had faded to brown. The envelope was addressed to Master Jonathan Whitmore, Continental Army, care of General Washington, but was never posted. October 1777, Whitmore Manor, New York. My dearest son Jonathan, I cannot call you traitor, though others do. Colonel Morrison said as much when he came to quarter his men here last week, his red coat bright as fresh blood against our autumn maples. Your boy is chosen poorly, Mrs. Whitmore, said he, settling himself in your father's chair as if he owned it by right. Fighting against his lawful sovereign, taking arms against the very crown that has protected these colonies for nigh on 2 centuries. 'Tis the very definition of treason. I served him tea in mother's best china, the set with the roses that you used to trace with your small finger when you were but a boy, and I held my tongue, though the words burned in my throat like swallowed coals. For what could I say that would not mark me as sympathetic to your cause, that would not bring suspicion upon this house where your sisters still sleep safely in their beds? But in my heart, my dear child, I know you are no traitor, misguided perhaps, influenced by dangerous men with their talk of rights and freedoms, but not the villain they paint you to be. You are still the boy who wept when you accidentally stepped upon a bird's nest, who insisted we tend the injured fledgling though it died, despite our care. You are still the young man who read Mr. Locke's essays by candlelight and asked such thoughtful questions about the nature of government and the consent of the governed. How can such a heart harbor treason? How can such a mind conceive of evil? Yet here we are, mother and son, separated not merely by the miles between this house and wherever your General Washington has led his ragged army, but by a chasm that seems to grow wider with each passing day of this dreadful conflict. Here we are, loving each other across a divide that may prove too great for even a mother's devotion to bridge. I received your last letter in July, smuggled to me by young Tom Henderson, who claims neutrality, but whose eyes hold sympathy for your cause. You wrote of the victory at Trenton, of how your spirits had lifted with that unexpected triumph after so many reverses. You described General Washington with such admiration, such faith in his leadership, that I could almost understand how you came to follow him into this rebellion. But Jonathan, my dear boy, victory in one small battle does not make a righteous war. Courage in the face of hardship does not transform rebellion into revolution. Whatever noble words your leaders speak about liberty and the rights of man, you are still taking arms against your lawful king, still breaking the bonds of loyalty that have held our empire together through countless trials. Your father, God rest his soul, would be heartbroken to see his son wearing the blue and buff of the Continental Army. He served His Majesty faithfully in the last war against the French, bore scars from Ticonderoga until the day he died, spoke often of his pride in being a subject of the greatest nation on earth. What would he say to see his eldest son making war upon the very flag he served with such devotion? But I know you remember his stories too. Remember how he spoke not just of duty to the crown, but of duty to what was right and just. He told you of soldiers who refused orders they deemed wicked, of officers who chose conscience over advancement when the two could not be reconciled. Perhaps, and here I grasp at hope like a drowning woman clutches driftwood, perhaps you have found in this rebellion something that speaks to the same sense of justice that your father tried to instill in all his children. I wish I could understand it as you do, my son. I wish I could see this war through your eyes, could comprehend how men who have known nothing but the king's protection can suddenly declare him a tyrant, deserving of armed resistance. But I am a woman of my generation, raised to believe that order and stability flow from proper authority, that rebellion against lawful government brings naught but chaos and suffering. And there has been suffering aplenty, Jonathan, more than you can know, sitting with your army and seeing only the military side of this conflict. Here at home, neighbor turns against neighbor, brother against brother, friend against friend. The Hendersons no longer speak to the Clarks over their disagreement about independence. Young William Morrison has been forbidden to court Mary Elizabeth Potter because his family remains loyal, while hers has embraced your cause. Even the children have learned to hate. Little Susan Potter, who once played dolls with your sister Margaret, now calls her Tory Spawn and will not come to our house for tea. The innocence of childhood, which I had thought proof against such adult madness, has been poisoned by the bitterness of their elders. Is this the liberty you fight for, my son? This freedom to tear apart the bonds of community and kinship that once made life in these colonies so pleasant and secure? But I do not write merely to scold or argue, though my heart is heavy with the weight of our divided loyalties. I write because you are my child, my firstborn, the baby I nursed through the fevers of infancy, the boy I taught to read by the light of our kitchen fire, the young man who carved his initials in the oak tree by our gate before marching away to join General Washington's army. You are my son, and no political differences can change that fundamental truth. I think of you constantly, wonder where you sleep and what you eat, and whether your uniform keeps you warm as the seasons turn toward winter. Tom Henderson tells me the Continental Army lacks for everything: proper clothing, sufficient food, adequate shelter. He says soldiers march barefoot through snow, leave bloody tracks on frozen ground, huddle around inadequate fires, trying to stay alive through the bitter nights. If this be true, then politics matter less to me than your survival. King George himself could command my loyalty, but it would not prevent me from sending warm stockings to my son who fights against him. The cause of American independence could be the most righteous in history, but it would not ease my fears for your safety as you wage war in its name. I have been knitting for months now, making warm things with yarn spun from our own sheep's wool. Stockings and mittens and a heavy winter coat lined with down from our geese. Your sister Charlotte helps, though her stitches are not yet as even as I might wish. She asks constantly when you will come home, when this terrible war will end, when our family will be whole again. How do I answer such questions, Jonathan? How do I explain to an 8-year-old child that her beloved brother has chosen a path that may lead him far from us forever? That the bonds of family may prove weaker than the pull of political conviction. I tell her, you are fighting for what you believe is right, just as good people sometimes disagree about important matters. I tell her, you still love us all dearly, that the war has not changed your heart toward your family, even if it has changed your allegiance to your king. I tell her that someday when the fighting stops, we will all be together again, and these troubles will be nothing but painful memories. But late at night, when the house is quiet and I sit alone with my sewing and my worries, I wonder if I am lying to her as much as to myself. I wonder if this war will end with reconciliation or with wounds too deep for healing. I wonder if you will ever again sit at our table, sleep in your boyhood bed, walk with me through the garden where we planted herbs together when you were young. The war has reached even into our valley now, Jonathan. Soldiers of both armies pass through regularly, some demanding provisions, others requesting them more politely, but with the clear expectation that refusal would be unwise. We have fed men wearing red coats and men wearing blue, have listened to their different versions of recent battles, their different certainties about ultimate victory. What strikes me most is how similar they are. These enemies who fight each other with such determination. They are young men far from home, homesick for mothers and sweethearts, tired and often hungry, worried about their futures and the futures of the cause they serve. Strip away the uniforms and the political rhetoric, and they might all be brothers gathered around the same fire, sharing the same dreams of peace and prosperity. Why must such similar souls be taught to kill each other? Why must this conflict that began with words and petitions now be settled with muskets and bayonets? Surely reasonable men on both sides could find some middle ground, some compromise that would preserve both liberty and loyalty, both colonial rights and imperial unity. But perhaps that is a woman's foolish hope, born of a mother's desire to see her children safe rather than a statesman's understanding of great principles. Perhaps some differences truly are irreconcilable, some conflicts capable of resolution only through the terrible arbitration of war. If that be so, then I pray yours is truly the righteous side, that the cause for which you risk your life and your mother's peace of mind is worthy of such sacrifice. I pray that history will vindicate your choice, that future generations will honor your name rather than curse it as that of a rebel who brought unnecessary suffering upon his fellow Americans. But more than that, I pray for your safety, for your health, for your survival through whatever trials lie ahead. Politics and principles matter less to me than your life, my dear son. I would rather have you home safe and sound as a repentant rebel than dead in some distant field as a martyred patriot. The leaves are turning now, painting our valley in shades of gold and crimson that would take your breath away if you could see them. The maples by the river are particularly beautiful this year, and the oak where you carved your initials has grown thick and strong, its bark healing around the letters you cut there with your boyhood knife. I walk there often, tracing those initials with my finger, remembering the boy who made them and wondering about the man he has become. Are you still the thoughtful young person who questioned everything, who read philosophy by candlelight and debated the great questions with such passionate earnestness? Or has war changed you, hardened you, made you into someone I might not recognize? I suppose I will not know until you come home again, if you come home again. That uncertainty gnaws at me like a persistent pain, the knowledge that our separation might be permanent, that political differences might prove stronger than family bonds. Your sisters ask about you constantly. Margaret, now 16 and growing more beautiful each day, saves every letter that might contain news of the Continental Army. She scans the casualty lists in whatever newspapers reach us, holding her breath until she has confirmed that your name does not appear among the dead or wounded. Little Charlotte has drawn pictures of you in your uniform, though she has never seen you wearing it. In her imagination, you look splendid and heroic, a figure from the adventure stories she loves so much. She does not understand that real war involves mud and fear and terrible wounds, that heroes often die unnamed and unmourned in fields far from home. Sometimes I am grateful for her innocence, for the way childhood shields her from the full horror of our situation, but sometimes I wonder if we do her no service by protecting her from truth, if she would be better prepared for whatever comes if she understood the real costs of the path you have chosen. I have tried to maintain normal life for their sake, to preserve some semblance of the secure, happy home they knew before this war began. We still gather for meals and prayers, still observe the same routines and traditions that gave structure to our days when the world made more sense. But everything has changed, Jonathan, even when we pretend it has not. The empty chair at our table speaks louder than our conversation. The unused bedroom upstairs feels like a shrine to a son who may never return. The very air in this house seems heavy with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. How long can a family sustain itself on hope alone? How long can love bridge a gap that grows wider with each passing month? These are questions I dare not voice aloud, but they haunt my thoughts in the dark hours before dawn. I showed Tom Henderson the warm clothes I've been making for you, asked if he might find a way to get them to your camp before winter sets in earnest. He promised to try, though he warned me that the Continental Army moves frequently and mail delivery is uncertain at best. Your boy may not receive them until spring, he said, holding up the heavy coat I had sewn with such care. If then. But I will send them anyway, Jonathan, because a mother must do what she can for her child, regardless of politics or practicality. I will send them with my love and my prayers and the hope that somewhere in this vast continent, my son will feel his mother's care wrapped around him like armor against the cold. I will send them with a letter too, not this rambling confession of fears and doubts, but a proper letter full of news from home and expressions of maternal affection. A letter that says nothing of politics or loyalty, nothing of the chasm that separates us, nothing of my fear that we may never again sit together in peace. That letter will speak only of love, because love is the one thing that transcends all political divisions, the one force strong enough to survive even the worst that this war might bring. Whatever else changes, whatever else this conflict destroys, that love remains constant as the northern star, unchanging as the flow of our river toward the sea. You are my son, Jonathan Whitmore, and I am your mother. Neither Parliament nor Continental Congress can alter that fundamental relationship. Neither king nor president can claim authority over the bonds that connect us. Whatever uniform you wear, whatever flag you follow, whatever oaths you swear to country or cause, you remain the child of my body and my heart. I cannot call you traitor, though others do, because I know the boy you were and trust the man you have become. I cannot condemn your choices, though I cannot understand them, because I believe you have acted according to your conscience and the principles your father and I tried to teach you. But oh, my dear child, how I wish this war had never come, how I wish these questions of loyalty and liberty had never arisen to divide us. How I wish you were still my little boy, safe in this house, asking innocent questions about books and birds and the changing seasons. The candle burns low, and I must close this letter that you will never read. These words that speak my heart, but can never reach their intended audience. But perhaps writing them has served some purpose. Perhaps giving voice to these fears and hopes has made them somehow more bearable. Know this, my beloved son, wherever you are, whatever dangers you face, you are held in a mother's love that no war can diminish, no politics can divide, no distance can weaken. That love follows you into every battle, stands guard over you in every camp, prays for you through every dark night of this terrible conflict. Come home when you can, Jonathan. Come home when honor allows, when duty permits, when the guns finally fall silent and peace returns to our wounded land. Come home to a mother who loves you without condition, who will welcome you without question, who will never call you traitor, though all the world might do so. Your devoted mother, Elizabeth Whitmore. This letter was discovered along with a bundle of warm winter clothing, never sent, wrapped in lavender and preserved by the dry conditions of the hidden compartment. According to military records, Jonathan Whitmore served as a lieutenant in the 3rd New York Continental Regiment and died of camp fever at Valley Forge in February 1778. Elizabeth Whitmore lived until 1802, never remarrying after her husband's death in 1775. Local records show she provided aid to American prisoners of war held by the British, suggesting her loyalties may have shifted after her son's death. The Whitmore Manor served as headquarters for both British and American forces at different times during the war. It was sold in 1820 and demolished in 1935. The oak tree mentioned in the letter stood until 1954, when it was felled by a hurricane. Local historians reported that the initials JW 1777 were still visible in the bark. Lost letter. The snow at Valley Forge tastes like your apple tart. A letter from Private Thomas Hartwell to his wife Margaret, written at Valley Forge, February 14th, 1778. My dearest Margaret, I take up my pen on this Valentine's Day with fingers so stiff from the cold I can scarce hold it proper. The ink near froze in the well twice already, and I had to warm it by the pitiful fire we managed to keep burning in our hut. But I must write to you, my darling girl, though I know not when this letter might find its way to you, if ever it does. The roads are nigh impassable, and our messengers, well, some have not returned from their last journeys. I hope this finds you well and warm in our little house on Chestnut Street. Do you still keep the fire burning in the front room? I picture you there of an evening, your needlework in your lap, the cat, old Brutus, curled at your feet like he always was. Is he still catching mice in the pantry? I dreamed of him last night. Funny thing to dream of a cat when there's a war on, but there he was, purring on our bed like nothing in the world had changed. You asked in your last letter, the one that reached me near Christmas, bless the courier who brought it, you asked what it's like here at Valley Forge. How do I tell you, Maggie? How do I put words to this that won't frighten you, that won't make you think less of your husband for the things I've seen and done and failed to do? The snow here tastes like your apple tart, if you can believe such a foolish thing. I know how that sounds. Tom Hartwell has finally lost his wits, you'll think. But hear me out. Yesterday morning I was so hungry, we've been on quarter rations for near a week now, that I scraped up a handful of the fresh snow and put it to my mouth just to have something, anything, to fill the hollow ache in my belly. And as it melted on my tongue, cold and clean, I could swear I tasted cinnamon and butter and those green apples from the tree behind your mother's house, the ones you always said were too tart for eating but perfect for baking. It was like you were right there with me, Maggie. Like I could smell the warmth of our kitchen on a Sunday morning, flour dusting your apron, your hair pinned up but with those little wisps escaping around your face the way they always did when you were concentrating. You'd hum while you worked. Do you remember? That little tune your grandmother taught you, the one about the farmer's daughter. I can't recall all the words now, but the melody. Lord, how I miss that melody. I've been carrying the memory of that apple tart with me like a talisman. When the wind cuts through our makeshift shelters and the cold seeps into your very bones, when the sick cough all night and you wonder if you'll be next, when you look at your fellow soldiers and see hollow cheeks and hollow eyes staring back at you, that's when I close my eyes and remember the taste of home. But I'm getting ahead of myself, as I always do when I write to you. Let me tell you what passes for life here in this frozen wilderness. We're housed, if you can call it that, in huts built of logs and mud and whatever scraps we could find. 12 men to a hut, sleeping on straw that's gone moldy from the damp. The chinking between the logs has mostly fallen out, so the wind whistles through like it's singing funeral songs. At night, we huddle together for warmth, though some of the men smell something fierce. When did we last have proper washing water? I've lost count. Young Billy Morrison from Lancaster County, he's been sharing my corner of the hut. He's barely 18, Maggie, younger than your brother Samuel. His mother sent him off with a pair of good wool stockings, but they've got holes in them now big enough to put your fist through. He tried to mend them with pine needles. Can you picture it? Pine needles for thread. It didn't work, of course, but Lord bless him for trying. He talks about his sweetheart back home, a girl named Rebecca, who promised to wait for him. He shows me her likeness, drawn on a scrap of paper, and asks me if I think she's pretty. She is, in that fresh young way that reminds me of you when we first met at the harvest dance. Do you remember that night, Maggie? You wore your blue dress, the one with the little pearl buttons, and your hair was braided with ribbons. I was too shy to ask you to dance at first, stood by the punch bowl like a fool, watching you laugh with the other girls. Finally, your father, bless his soul, came over and said, "Thomas Hartwell, if you don't ask my daughter to dance, I'm going to tell her you think she has 2 left feet." The memory of your face when you said yes, it's kept me warm on more than one bitter night. But I'm wandering again. It's this place, Maggie. It does something to a man's mind. Makes you think too much, remember too much. Maybe that's what keeps us from going completely mad. The worst part isn't the cold, though it's bitter enough to freeze a man's spit before it hits the ground. It isn't the hunger, though my belly cleaves to my backbone most days. It's the doubt, my dear wife, the terrible gnawing doubt that maybe we're fools, all of us. Maybe King George and his armies will grind us into the mud and hang General Washington from the nearest tree. And what will we have to show for it? What will we have died for? I see it in the other men's faces, that same question. When Private Jenkins died last week of the lung fever, when we wrapped his poor thin body in his own blanket because that's all we had for a shroud, I wondered what I'd tell his wife. What grand cause was worth leaving her a widow with 3 little ones to feed? Captain Miller tries to keep our spirits up. He reads to us from General Washington's letters, talks about liberty and freedom and building something new in this world. And when he speaks, his voice strong and sure, I almost believe it. I think about our future children, Maggie. God willing, we'll have them someday. And I think about the world we might leave them. A world where they won't have to bow and scrape to some king across the ocean who's never set foot on American soil, who doesn't know the smell of our forests or the taste of our corn. But then night falls, and the cold seeps in, and young Billy Morrison starts coughing that same cough that took Jenkins, and I wonder if I'm a fool or a patriot or both. The letters from home are precious things here, more valuable than gold or warm clothes or even food. When word comes that the post has arrived, you'd think we'd won a great victory from the way the men gather round. But for every man who gets a letter, 3 more walk away with their heads down, trying not to let on how it cuts them. I've been fortunate, blessed, to receive 3 letters from you since we made camp here in December. I keep them in my coat pocket, wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry. Sometimes I read them to Billy and some of the other boys. Your words about the early spring flowers pushing up in Mrs. Henderson's garden, about the new foal born to Johnson's mare, about the way the light falls across our kitchen table in the morning. These things are like food for our souls. You wrote that you've been helping Mrs. Patterson with her sewing, taking in mending to earn a few shillings. It pains me to think of you working so hard, your dear hands growing rough with needle pricks and washing. But I'm proud, too. Proud of my strong, capable wife who doesn't sit idle when times are hard. Your mother raised you right, God rest her soul. I've been thinking a lot about your mother lately, about that last conversation we had with her before she passed, when she took my hand and made me promise to take care of you. She's stronger than she looks, Thomas, she said, but she's got a tender heart. Don't let the world make it hard. I hope I haven't failed in that promise, Maggie. I hope this war, this long separation, hasn't put too much hardness in your tender heart. You asked about the other men, so let me tell you about some of them. There's Sergeant O'Brien from Virginia, who has 7 children and a farm he left in his brother's care. He whittles little animals from scraps of wood and tells stories about each of his young ones. Mary, who can already milk a cow, little Patrick, who follows him everywhere, baby Catherine, who said her first word the day before he left for war. He's carved a whole menagerie by now. Horses and pigs and chickens and dogs. Says he'll give them to his children when he gets home, tell them their papa was thinking of them every day. Then there's Dr. Edmonds. Not a real doctor, mind you, but he studied some medicine before the war, and he's the closest thing we have to one. He tends the sick as best he can with what little supplies we have. Saw him cry yesterday over a boy who died of the bloody flux. Just 18 years old, same as Billy. Dr. Edmonds held that boy's hand while he passed, whispered prayers over him, and then walked out into the snow and wept like his heart was broken. These are the men I serve with, Maggie. Good men, men with families and dreams and fears just like mine. The days here pass slow as molasses in winter. We drill when the weather permits, though half the men are without proper shoes and leave bloody prints in the snow. We forage for anything edible, bark from certain trees, roots, anything that might fill the belly. Some of the men have gotten skilled at catching the occasional rabbit or squirrel, though game is scarce. The horses, well, let's just say we've eaten some things I never thought I would. But it's the nights that are hardest, when the sun goes down and the temperature drops and you can hear the wind howling like all the lost souls in creation. That's when the homesickness hits hardest. That's when I think about our little house and wonder if you're lying in our bed, if you're cold, if you're safe. I worry about you walking alone after dark, about having enough firewood, about what you'd do if someone tried to take advantage of a woman whose husband is away at war. Sometimes I dream I'm walking up our front path. I can see the lamplight in the window, see your shadow moving about inside. In my dream, I push open the door and you turn around and smile. That smile that made me fall in love with you in the first place. You don't say anything about how thin I've gotten or how ragged my clothes are. You just come into my arms and everything is right with the world again. But then I wake up to Billy Morrison's coughing and the smell of 12 unwashed men and the cold that seems to live in my bones now. And I know I'm still here in this frozen hell, still fighting a war that might not end in my lifetime. Yet I don't despair, my darling girl, not entirely, because I carry you with me, not just your letters, but the memory of you, the hope of you, the promise of the life we'll build together when this is over, when I taste snow and think of apple tart, when I see the first star come out at night and remember how we used to stand on our front step and look at the sky together, when I wake up and for just a moment forget where I am. These are the things that keep me human. Spring will come, Maggie. It has to. And when it does, when the snow melts and the roads open and this terrible winter is just a memory, I'll find my way home to you. We'll plant a garden behind the house, tomatoes and beans and maybe some of those herbs you always wanted to try growing. We'll sit in our front step in the evening and watch the sun go down. And maybe, if God wills it, you'll bake me another one of those apple tarts. And I'll tell you about the snow at Valley Forge and how it tasted like home. Keep the fire burning for me, my love. Keep the lamp in the window. And know that whatever happens, wherever this war takes me, you are my North Star, my true direction, my reason for believing that tomorrow might be better than today. Your devoted husband, Thomas. Postscript. Give old Brutus a scratch behind the ears for me. Tell him his master is counting the days until he can hear that rusty old purr again. Lost letter. They burned our books, but not our memory. This letter was discovered in 1943 during renovation of a house in Charleston's historic district. Found wrapped in oilcloth inside a hidden cavity beneath the cellar stairs, the letter was written on rough paper with homemade ink that had turned sepia with age. The envelope was addressed to Miss Patience Thornton, care of Mr. Samuel Adams, Boston, Massachusetts, but was never posted. December 1780, Charleston, South Carolina. My dearest sister Patience, they burned our books, but not our memory. I write this by the light of a single tallow candle in the cellar of what was once the Whitmore Academy for Young Ladies, where I taught proper penmanship and improper ideas about liberty for 7 years before the British came to liberate us from our rebellious thoughts. The irony is not lost on me that I now practice both skills in the same underground chamber, writing carefully by candlelight while teaching dangerous concepts about the rights of man to children whose parents trust me to keep them safe from more than just ignorance. You ask in your last letter, smuggled to me through the means I dare not commit to paper, how we fare under British occupation. You ask if the stories reaching Boston about Charleston's suffering are true, if the tales of burned libraries and shuttered schools reflect the reality of life under His Majesty's renewed protection. The stories are true, dear sister, though they capture only a fraction of what has been lost. But they also miss what has been preserved, what has been hidden, what continues to grow in secret places like seeds, waiting for spring. Yes, they burned our books. I watched from the second-story window of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house as Colonel Balfour's men carried armload after armload of volumes from our Academy's library into Meeting Street. Philosophy and history, poetry and mathematics, treatises on natural law and collections of Greek classics, all fed to the flames like kindling for some peculiar bonfire celebrating their victory over dangerous learning. I wept that day, patience, wept for Mr. Locke's essays on government, for Plutarch's lives of noble Greeks and Romans, for the beautiful copy of Paradise Lost that our dear father had given me when I first accepted the position here, wept for the hours of careful instruction those books represented, the minds they had opened, the questions they had raised in young hearts hungry for understanding. But even as I wept, I found myself reciting passages from memory, lines from Milton about the mind being its own place, capable of making a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. Thoughts from Mr. Locke about governments deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Phrases from Plutarch about the education of youth being the foundation of all civilization. They burned our books, but they could not burn what we had already learned from them. The Academy itself was requisitioned as quarters for officers of the King's Own Regiment. I was informed, quite politely as these things go, that my services as an instructor were no longer required, that the education of young ladies would henceforth be supervised by persons whose loyalty to the crown was beyond question. We cannot have impressionable minds corrupted by treasonous philosophies, Captain Morrison explained to me with what he doubtless intended as kindness. These colonial children require proper instruction in their duties as subjects of His Majesty, not dangerous notions about rights and freedoms that exist only in the fevered imaginations of rebels. I curtsied prettily and agreed that education should indeed serve proper purposes. I did not mention that I had already begun to consider what those proper purposes might be, nor that they might differ somewhat from the captain's understanding. You would be proud of how quickly our little conspiracy took shape, dear sister. Mrs. Whitmore, whose husband died at Camden fighting General Cornwallis, offered the use of her cellar. Young Tom Henderson, barely 16 but old enough to understand what we were about, volunteered to carry messages between families. Mrs. Sarah Middleton, whose son is with General Greene somewhere in the Carolina backcountry, agreed to provide what books she could salvage from her own library. And the children, Oh, patience, you should see how eagerly they come to our secret school, how they slip through back gardens and kitchen doors to gather in this damp cellar where we huddle around candles and share the precious few volumes we managed to save from the flames. We have only 17 books now. 17, where once we had hundreds. But among them are treasures beyond price. A battered copy of Cato's letters that someone hid beneath a loose floorboard, a volume of Blackstone's commentaries smuggled out in a flour sack, even a small edition of Common Sense wrapped in oilcloth and buried in Mrs. Middleton's vegetable garden. With these 17 books and what we carry in our minds, we continue the work that Colonel Balfour thought he had ended with his bonfire. We read together, discuss together, think together about what it means to be free people living under foreign rule, about what our duties are to truth when power demands we speak only lies. Little Mary Henderson, not yet 12, asked me yesterday whether it was wrong to love books that the king's officers had declared wicked. Such a question from such a young child. I told her that books, like people, should be judged by their character, rather than by who approves or disapproves of them. But how do we judge character in a book, Miss Thornton? She asked with that earnest expression children wear when they're grappling with ideas too large for their years. I showed her the difference between books that ask us to think and books that tell us what to think, between works that trust readers to form their own judgments and those that demand unquestioning acceptance. We compared passages from Pilgrim's Progress, which even the British authorities find acceptable, with selections from Mr. Paine's pamphlet, noting how both call us to examine our consciences, but reach rather different conclusions about our obligations to earthly powers. By the end of our lesson, Mary had begun to understand that the most dangerous books are often those that teach us to trust our own minds, rather than submit blindly to authority. A dangerous lesson for a 12-year-old girl in occupied Charleston, but perhaps the most important one she will ever learn. The physical conditions in our cellar school would appall you, I fear. The air is close and damp, heavy with the smell of earth and mildew. Water seeps through the stone walls when it rains, creating puddles that we must step around carefully, lest we slip and extinguish our precious candles. The ceiling is so low that I must stoop when moving about, and the rough walls snag our clothing and sometimes our hair. But you should hear the discussions that take place in this unlikely classroom, sister. Yesterday we debated whether violent resistance to tyranny could ever be justified, with young William Middleton, barely 14, arguing eloquently that self-defense was a natural right that applied to nations as well as individuals. Last week, we examined the differences between Greek democracy and Roman republicanism, with even the youngest students contributing insights that would have impressed their university-educated fathers. These children understand something their elders sometimes forget, that ideas are more powerful than armies, that thoughts can survive the destruction of the books that first contained them, that education is not merely the transmission of information, but the awakening of minds to their own possibilities. I think often of our childhood in Boston patience, of the way our father encouraged us to question everything, to read widely, to form our own opinions about the great issues of our time. Remember how he would set us problems at the dinner table, not mathematical exercises, but moral and philosophical puzzles that required us to think carefully about justice and duty and the proper relationship between citizens and their government? A mind that accepts everything without examination, he used to say, is like a stomach that digests poison as readily as nourishment. Both will ultimately destroy their owners. Those dinner table conversations prepared me for this work in ways that formal teacher training never could. They taught me that education is not about filling empty vessels with predetermined knowledge, but about kindling fires in minds already capable of illumination. The British authorities would be horrified to know what goes on in our little cellar school. We read Mr. Jefferson's words about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We discussed Mr. Adams' thoughts on the balance of powers in government. We examined the philosophical foundations of the arguments that led our colonies to declare independence. But we also read Shakespeare and study mathematics, parse Latin grammar, and explore the principles of natural philosophy. For the beauty of underground education, dear sister, is that it can be truly liberal, free to pursue knowledge wherever it leads, unconstrained by official curricula or political requirements. Yesterday, little Sarah Whitmore discovered that the same mathematical principles that govern the motion of planets also apply to the swing of pendulums. The joy on her face at that moment of understanding, the pure delight of a mind making connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, reminded me why education matters more than politics, why the cultivation of human reason is worth whatever risks we take to preserve it. Of course, there are risks. Colonel Balfour has made it clear that unauthorized gatherings are forbidden, that the teaching of seditious materials is punishable by imprisonment or worse. Twice we have had to extinguish our candles and hide in the darkest corners of the cellar when British patrols passed too close to our meeting place. The children have learned to slip away separately, to take different routes home, to speak casually of needlework and cooking lessons when asked how they spend their afternoons. They have become accomplished in the arts of secrecy that their parents practice every day, the small deceptions necessary for survival under occupation. But they have also learned larger truths about the relationship between power and knowledge, about why those who rule by force fear those who think freely. They understand in their bones what their textbooks might have taught them as abstract principles, that education is inherently subversive, that learning to think for oneself is the first step toward refusing to be controlled by others. Mrs. Whitmore asked me last week whether I thought we were doing right, whether the knowledge we share with these children justifies the dangers we create for them and their families. 'Tis a fair question, one that keeps me awake some nights as I listen to the footsteps of British sentries in the street above. But then I see young Tom Henderson reading Cato's letters with the same intensity his father once brought to his law practice. I watch Mary Henderson work through a problem in natural philosophy with patience and precision that would make Mr. Newton proud. I hear William Middleton discuss the principles of representative government with understanding that surpasses that of many grown men. And I know that whatever happens to us, whatever price we pay for this defiance, we have already achieved something precious beyond measure. We have kept alive the flame of learning in a time when powerful men would prefer darkness. We have proven that ideas cannot be conquered by burning books, that thoughts cannot be controlled by controlling schools. The children understand this too, I think. They speak sometimes of the world they hope to see when this war is over, when they can again attend proper schools and read openly the books we now share in whispers. But they also speak of carrying forward what they have learned here, of remembering not just the knowledge we have shared, but the experience of learning in freedom despite living under tyranny. Will we always remember how to think for ourselves, Miss Thornton? Little Mary asked me yesterday. Even when we're old and other people tell us what to believe? I assured her that once a mind learns to question, it rarely forgets how. But I also reminded her that thinking for oneself requires constant practice, that the muscles of the mind, like those of the body, grow weak without regular exercise. Then we must exercise them every day, she replied with the seriousness that childhood brings to important discoveries. We must ask questions and seek answers and never stop wondering about things, even when we're grown up. From the mouths of babes, dear sister, in her simple words, I heard an echo of all the great philosophers whose works we study, the understanding that intellectual freedom is not a gift bestowed by governments, but a capacity that must be cultivated and defended by individuals. I have been thinking much about memory lately, about the role it plays in preserving what would otherwise be lost. The books are gone, but the words live on in our minds. The academy is closed, but the spirit of inquiry continues in this cramped cellar. The old forms of education have been suppressed, but learning itself adapts and endures. Perhaps this is what the British authorities fail to understand, that knowledge is not contained in buildings or books, but carried in the hearts and minds of people. They can burn our libraries and close our schools, but they cannot extinguish the human desire to learn, to grow, to understand the world and our place in it. The children have begun creating their own books, copying out passages they particularly value, illustrating them with careful drawings, binding them with thread salvaged from worn-out clothing. These homemade volumes will never match the beauty of the books we lost, but they represent something perhaps more precious, knowledge preserved through love rather than duty, learning pursued despite danger rather than because of requirement. Young William Middleton showed me his commonplace book yesterday, a collection of quotes and observations copied in his careful handwriting, decorated with pressed flowers and sketches of birds. In it, I found lines from Milton and Locke, thoughts from our discussions about natural rights, even a mathematical proof he had worked out himself. "'Tis not as fine as the books they burned," he said with the apologetic air of youth, offering imperfect work to authority. But I told him truthfully that his book was more beautiful than any in our former library, because it represented not just knowledge received, but knowledge claimed, made personal, woven into the fabric of his own understanding. The British burned our books, but William has created something they cannot destroy, a mind furnished with ideas he has chosen for himself. This is our victory, Patience, our answer to those who would rule by keeping others ignorant. Every child who learns to think freely is a defeat for tyranny. Every mind that refuses to accept easy answers is a challenge to arbitrary authority. Every question asked in pursuit of truth is an act of rebellion against those who would prefer unthinking obedience. We may lose this war. Indeed, some days it seems we surely must, when news reaches us of defeats and disasters befalling the Continental cause. But we have already won something more important than any military victory. We have kept alive the spirit of free inquiry that gave birth to our revolution. The conviction that ordinary people can think for themselves about the great questions of government and justice. The candle burns low, and I must soon end this letter that you will likely never receive. But before I do, I want you to know that the work continues here in Charleston, that learning endures despite occupation, that the children you helped me teach to read in Boston have grown into young people who understand the power and responsibility of literacy. When this war ends, however it ends, there will be a generation of Americans who learned their most important lessons in hidden places, who understand in their bones that education is worth any risk, who know that books can be burned, but ideas live forever in the minds that embrace them. They burned our books, dear sister, but they could not burn our memory. They closed our school, but they could not close our minds. They silenced our public voice, but they could not silence our private conversations with the great thinkers whose words we carry in our hearts. And so the real education continues, passed from mind to mind like a flame that cannot be extinguished, growing brighter with each new soul it illuminates. This is our rebellion, our revolution, our declaration of independence from those who would keep us ignorant and therefore manageable. With all my love and unshakable faith in the power of learning, your devoted sister, Constance. This letter was discovered along with 17 carefully preserved books and a collection of handmade student notebooks filled with copied passages and original thoughts. According to Charleston records, Constance Thornton was arrested in January 1781 for conducting seditious activities, but was released when the British evacuated the city in December of that year. She reopened the Whitmore Academy in 1782 and continued teaching until her death in 1823. Many of her former students became leaders in South Carolina's educational and political life, including several who served in the state legislature and one who became a federal judge. The cellar where she held her secret classes was preserved by subsequent owners and now houses a museum exhibit about education during the Revolutionary War. A plaque installed in 1976 reads, "Here, American children learn that ideas are stronger than armies, that minds cannot be conquered, that education is freedom's foundation."